Good morning, everybody. This is Marty from Dog's Blog, and the noontime report is the morning session of the Frank Carson et al. Trial on October 26, 2018. Court was, I thought was scheduled to start at 9, but it actually, I think it had been changed to 9:30 for some reason. Judge was on the bench at 9:35. Jury's not brought up as of yet. They had several witnesses, actually two from each side, come in that were scheduled. They bring them in every so often and then order them to come back. Defense witness, a Melvin Morrison and a Brooke Varner, were both ordered to come back on December 14th, 2018. One of them has a problem with having to take off work to constantly come into court and was not too happy. He's losing money. But he's ordered back on December 14th. They made it on a Friday. He says it makes it easier for him to come in on a Friday. Also, there was a Darlene Barton and a Tanya Johnson. They were ordered to come back next week on November 1st. Darlene Barton's coming in at 9 a.m. Tanya Johnson's coming in at 1:30 p.m. These were former renters at the Carson property on 9th Street at the time this alleged homicide occurred. So the jury was brought up around 9:45 a.m. Jim Hamiel was back on the stand. Remember, he's from the Ripon Department of Justice Ripon lab, where he had done some of the excavation on Poppencork lot and some other things, and also he was qualified as a firearms expert on ballistics and can do comparisons on riflings and tool marks and such. She again did some more qualifications on him. I didn't write it all down. There's no need for me to, because they're just talking about some of the educations and some of the training that he's had. But basically, this was in regards to the soil issues. All the qualification they did yesterday was on the firearms. This is on soil issues. He was been involved in many cases. He's been around for a while. He's not really an old guy, but he's been around for a while. And he was also mentioned that he was involved in the Speed Freak Killers case when they did the well dig in Linden. He talked about the only way that they could do that excavation was with the great big backhoe, which destroyed all the evidence and all the bones and ended up combining all the bones in that case. And it caused a big problem for the families of all the victims. There was quite a few victims in that well. And you note that I've done a couple articles about that, and I have a friend of mine is one of the family members in that case. When the DA went to certify him as an expert, they ended up in a sidebar. She wanted to certify him as an expert in soil and excavation of human remains. In fact, they ended up going right back and doing another sidebar. And Jai Gohel wanted to do a voir dire on him when they came back from the sidebar. Now, Jai Gohel mentioned a lot of technical aspects that I'd never be able to repeat. But basically, it was about how the remains decompose and how it affects the soil, the compressions in the soil, how the soil decompresses as the remains deteriorate, odors, all kinds of things, that a lot of technical terms that he was using. And they also asked him if he had any education or specific any specific education or experience in areas of geology, soil, the actual human remains, cadavers, and the decomposition of the remains, how the remains affect the soil, the different compounds of the chemical origins of the remains, and so on. He doesn't have any of that specific knowledge or experience, nor does he have any information or knowledge in the insect activity as to the remains and the life of that insect activity. He says he knew that there was insect activity. The remains draw insect activity, but the insects do leave once the remains is removed. But Jai Gohil asked him if there's any type of remnants from those insect activities, like shells or casings or anything off a larva or anything like that. And he said, yes, there is indicators that there's, after the insects moved, there'd still be remnants that they had left there. So Judge Aniga, of course, went ahead and certified him as an expert in soil, and etc. They first started talking about the bullet. This is the spent mushroomed bullet. And he said he had received the evidence in regards to do a ballistics analysis. It was a lead bullet. He received it on March 5th of 2014. He said it was a small caliber bullet. It was a lead bullet with brass plating, and the brass plating has a high component of the copper element, and zinc is also included there. He did a microscope exam. He says there's very, very little rifling on the bullet. And he says the manufacturer, when they put a gun together or design a gun, they decide how to rifle their barrels. Those are the grooves, the lands and grooves that they run down the middle of the barrel after they drill it out to give spin to the bullet to make it go more true in flight. Like he compared it to throwing a football. If you throw a football end over end, it's not going to do very well. But if you spin it and rifle it, it travels well. He said the bullet had 16 lands and grooves with a right twist, and it was a .22 caliber bullet. The bullet weighed 40 grams and had brass plating, and that weight does compare to the typical .22 caliber long rifle cartridge. He said he received a Ruger rifle by the sheriff's office to do a comparison on, and he said he did check the manufacturer's specs on the bullet, and they do not match if he fired a bullet through that rifle barrel that he did receive, that would not match that bullet because of the manufacturer specifications of there's 16 grooves, and it's not the rifle obviously not the rifle that's used, so it was not even tested. He did do any possible firearms that could have been used using this criteria, what was on the bullet. He said there were 16 lands and grooves, and he searched the database that they have, and that matched what he called the character of that bullet. The database revealed a marking. The database revealed a Marlin firearm with those type of characteristics. He did note that it was still possible because of oddball type of things or, glitches in the system or whatever it may be, that there are other firearms that match that bullet, but the Marlin is the only one that came up through that database. They've shown picture number 546, and that was a picture of the expanded bullet. I'm sorry, it was evidence number 546. It wasn't a picture. It was the expanded bullet that was on a whiteboard for display. And he was asked if there's another firearm that he was given to compare. It was a Smith & Wesson .22 caliber rifle. It was an AR-15, he said, style rifle. It had pistol grip, a modified stock, and I think he said a high-capacity magazine too. But he said that was chambered for a .223 ammunition, so it's not capable of firing that type of ammunition. The caliber on a .223 is really not much different. It's just the bullet, the casing itself that holds the powder, and how it chambers in, how it loads into the chamber is going to be different, and would never be able to be fired from that rifle. So that one was not tested. They talked about he also received a Marlin barrel and just a barrel and receiver. The barrel and the receiver were intact, but there was no stock, there was no trigger mechanism or anything like that. He said the lab has a number of firearms in their inventory, so he used parts off of some of those other firearms, which are the same model number and such, and made the gun functional, and he fired a round. Same general fire patterns that are in the bullet, talking about the ballistics on the bullet. So he compared the bullets side by side in the microscope, as you see on TV on CSI. They put them side by side in a microscope, but he could not exclude the bullet. The evidence bullet had a little more detail, and he said, but the problem, the evidence bullet had very little detail, I should say, and the problem with the evidence bullet, they'll never be able to compare it to a gun because there's not enough detail in that bullet because of the damage to it, or the decomposition, whatever it was, would never be able to get an exact match with another barrel because of the condition of that bullet. So then she talked about the search warrant he was on 914 9th Street on 8/14/15. He said he had met Corey Brown there with the Stanislaus Sheriff's Department, and he was asked to take photos on the property. He said it was a typical crime scene assist that they do all the time. And they wanted him to take photos of the buildings inside and out, and also the property. So she showed him photos number 575 through 630. She did go through all those photos. I didn't write each one of them down, but because some of them are just a slight move to the right, and he was kind of clockwise position moving, and so there's no need to write them all down. But basically, he took pictures from the back fence of the property, which is the fence between the lander side of the property, along the fence line, the barn, some of the containers, more containers. He showed he was showing where the double-decker bus was, showed where you can see the garage from the back of the property. There was something in the bottom of one picture, but she asked him to describe it. He says, I don't know what it is. And so for some reason she wanted that described, and finally she gave up on that after multiple objections. There was a green fence that connected it to the cement cedar wall that went around the property and across the front of the property. The lander side of the property, took some pictures from the old barn on the lander side towards the back property. I also noted some old vehicles that were on the property, and some pictures were taken, and he slightly moved around. A picture of 838 Lander, towards Lander, the property on 9th Street towards Lander, by the garage, and some different angles. And then he went over on the outside of the fence towards the front gate, and did the green fence by the front, the double gate in the front, or the large gate in the front. And then there was a bunch of pictures of the Lander property alongside and around the red barn back there where the horseshoe pit was and stuff. Just turning around and rotating angles. That's it. That's all we got done this morning. We're going back at 1:30 for more testimony from this gentleman. Just a note that there's been a massive amount of activity on the Kurt Bunch poll that I put up. He has a couple of friends, one friend in particular that's doing a massive amount of voting in his favor. That's okay. That's what it's all about. If you go and want to try to catch up to him on the voting, because he's in the lead of he didn't deserve that, you can go ahead and do that. there has been a lot of activity on that post. So just keeping the update on it. We'll be back at 1:30 this afternoon, and don't forget that there's a podcast tonight at 6 o'clock.